They dumped their winter mess on my land, so I froze their entire street and melted their power. I woke up to the sound of engines growling outside my cabin. When I stepped onto the porch, my jaw dropped. The HOA's snow removal trucks were dumping massive loads of icy, dirty snow right onto my private property. A full 10-foot wall of frozen sludge blocking my driveway. I stormed out toward the workers. "This is my land," I yelled. "HOA orders," the driver shrugged. "We're out of space." Of space. They had miles of common area, but using my land was easy for them. And HOA President Linda loved easy, even if it meant breaking the law. I took pictures, videos, measurements. If they wanted a fight, they just earned one. Next morning, the sky was the color of old aluminum, flat and indifferent. The temperature had dropped again overnight. The slush that had covered half the street yesterday had frozen into dirty, jagged ice sculptures. Every step on the sidewalk sounded like breaking glass. I didn't bother with coffee. I pulled on the same coat I'd worn when I discovered the mess, still carrying the faint smell of wet concrete and diesel, and walked straight to the HOA office on Maple Crest Lane. The little brick building looked innocent enough: white shutters, neatly trimmed boxwood, a brass plaque that read Maple Heights Homeowners Association, S. 1998. But everyone in the neighborhood knew the real name was unspoken: Linda's Kingdom. I pushed the glass door. A small bell jingled, cheerful and wrong. Linda McAllister sat behind the reception desk that was far too large for the room, like a throne someone had stolen from a bigger castle. She was already looking at me before the door closed. She must have seen me coming up the path through the blinds. Her silver blonde bob didn't move when she tilted her head. Neither did the slow, mocking smile that spread across her narrow lips. "Morning, Thomas," she said, voice sweet as antifreeze. "You're up early, trouble sleeping." I didn't answer the bait. I laid both palms flat on the counter, the cold seeping through the laminate. Someone dumped 3 cubic yards of snow and ice directly onto my driveway sometime between 11 p.m. and 6 a.m. The entire front half is blocked. I can't get my car out. The mailbox is half buried, and there's a 2-meter-long scrape along the garage door that wasn't there yesterday. Linda leaned back in her ergonomic chair, the leather side under her. "It's just snow, Thomas," she said. "It'll melt eventually. Stop overreacting." I felt the pulse jump in my temple. It's not just snow. It's deliberate property damage. Someone used a front-end loader or skid steer. You can still see the tire tracks in the neighbor's lawn across the street. They didn't even try to hide it. She lifted one perfectly shaped eyebrow. "And you think the HOA is responsible for what? Patrolling the streets at night, hearing security. We're a volunteer board, darling, not Blackwater." "I'm not asking you to catch them. I'm telling you it happened on association-managed common land before they crossed onto private property. The snow came from the big pile at the retention pond, the one the association is supposed to keep clear of equipment. I want an incident report filed today, and I want the damage assessed and the cost of cleanup and repair covered under the reserve fund or your snow removal contractor's insurance. Whichever one of you geniuses left the gate unlocked." The smile didn't leave her face. If anything, it deepened, turned inward, became something almost private, like she was enjoying a joke only she could hear. She reached for a yellow legal pad, tore off the top sheet slowly, deliberately, then picked up a pen with a little plastic snowman on top. "File a complaint if you must," she said, voice light. "It'll be reviewed in 8 to 10 weeks. That's our standard processing time for non-emergency violations." She started writing, the pen scratching loudly in the too-quiet room. "Unless, of course, you'd like to elevate it to the full board at the next meeting. That would be," she glanced at the wall calendar behind her, "February 17th, assuming we have quorum." I stared at her. "You're enjoying this?" "I'm doing my job, Thomas." She looked up, eyes the color of lake water in December. "You bought into a community with rules. Rules take time, process. You can't just storm in here demanding instant justice like some reality television vigilante. There are children who walk that sidewalk to the bus stop. Someone could break an ankle. A pregnant woman could slip. An elderly person could fall and fracture a hip. You want to wait 8 weeks for that to happen before you admit there's a problem. Linda tapped the pen once, twice, against her lower lip. Children should be supervised. Pregnant women should watch where they're going. And the elderly, she let the sentence drift unfinished, poisonous. Well, they chose to live in a northern climate. Personal responsibility, Thomas. It's in the covenants somewhere. I'm sure you read them. I took one long breath through my nose. I want the security camera footage from the retention pond gate. The one you installed last spring with the special assessment we all paid for. Her smile flickered the first crack. That system is for monitoring common areas during business hours. It doesn't run 24/7. Power conservation, you understand. Bullshit. I saw the invoice. It's got motion-activated recording and cloud backup for 30 days. For the first time, she looked genuinely annoyed. The pen stopped moving. Are you calling me a liar, Thomas? I'm calling you selective with the truth. There's a difference. Silence stretched between us, thin and sharp. She finally leaned forward, elbows on the desk, chin resting on laced fingers. Let me explain how this works, she said softly. You can file your little form. You can CC the entire board. You can even call the police, though good luck getting them to treat a snow pile as a felony. But every single person on that board owes me favors. Every single one of them has a driveway that gets plowed first when the big storms hit. Every single one of them knows who signs off on the landscaping contract that keeps their grass emerald in July. You want to play hardball. Fine, but understand the board isn't going to move against me. Not for you, not for anyone. She slid the yellow form across the counter toward me. The top line already read, violation/complaint form. Fill it out if it makes you feel better, or don't. Either way, that snow isn't going anywhere until the next warm day, and by then, she shrugged one elegant shoulder. It'll just be water under the garage door. No harm, no foul. I didn't touch the paper. She wanted me helpless. She wanted me humiliated. She wanted me to learn my place in the quiet, orderly hierarchy she'd spent 12 years constructing. She didn't know I had spent the last 3 hours before dawn on the phone with a friend who owns a private investigation firm in Columbus. She didn't know I'd already pulled the public records for every contractor who'd touched the retention pond in the last 18 months. She didn't know I'd photographed the tire tracks, measured the tread pattern, and matched it within 2 minutes of searching online databases to a John Deere 332G that belonged to Snowbusters LLC, whose owner happened to sit on the board as landscape liaison. And she definitely didn't know I had no intention of waiting 8 to 10 weeks. I picked up the form, folded it once, tucked it into my inside coat pocket. You'll be hearing from my attorney, I said. Linda laughed, a short, bright, crystalline sound. Oh, Thomas, everyone says that, and then they fill out the form anyway. I turned toward the door. Behind me, she called sweetly. Have a nice day, neighbor. The bell jingled again as I stepped back into the cold. The wind had picked up. It smelled like more snow coming. Good. Let it come. The deeper it buries everything, the louder the crash will be when I finally pull the first pin. December 31, 2025. The neighborhood smelled like wet asphalt and wood smoke. Everyone else was inside preparing for New Year's Eve, champagne flutes lined up, bad music already leaking through windows. I spent the day in my garage with the door half open to the cold, surrounded by evidence like a detective in a bad crime show. First came the boundary lines. I dragged out the old survey stakes from the shed, the ones the previous owner had left behind with faded orange ribbons still attached. The plat map was yellowed but still legible. I walked the line between the retention pond common area and my lot line 3 times, marking every point with fluorescent pink spray paint. The border was crystal clear. The concrete apron of my driveway sat entirely on private property. Anything dumped beyond that pink line was trespass, plain and simple. Next video. The street had no HOA cameras worth a damn, but 3 houses down Mrs. Delgado had one of those ridiculous 4K doorbell cameras that recorded everything within 30 meters. She hated Linda almost as much as I did, something about a fine for leaving Christmas lights up 3 days past the covenant deadline. I brought her coffee and a plate of store-bought cookies. She handed me a USB drive without me even having to ask twice. The footage was timestamped too, 17 a.m. on the 29th. Grainy but unmistakable. A white skid steer with a front bucket, headlights off, crawling along the edge of the retention pond. The operator, face hidden under a hood, scooped from the massive pile the association had created after the Christmas storm, drove the 100 meters across the grass margin, then dumped the entire load straight onto my driveway. He made 2 more trips. On the 3rd pass, the bucket caught the edge of my garage door, dragging metal against metal for almost 2 full seconds. The screech was audible even on the cheap audio. I watched it 6 times, pausing on the clearest frame. The machine's side panel was visible just long enough. SNOWBUSTRS LLC. Contract SB 202511. Maple Heights HOA. I already knew the number. I'd pulled the contract from the public records portal 2 nights earlier. Then the bylaws. The HOA, Declaration of Covenants, Conditions, and Restrictions, was a 147-page doorstop I'd skimmed once when I bought the house and then promptly buried in a filing cabinet. I found it again under a stack of old tax returns. Section 7.4, Maintenance of Common Areas, was brutally clear. No owner, contractor, or agent of the association shall deposit snow, ice, soil, construction debris, or any other material onto private property without express written consent of the affected owner. Violation shall constitute a material breach subject to immediate remediation at the violator's expense and potential lien on association funds. There was even a footnote citing Ohio Revised Code 971.03. Unauthorized dumping on private land was a 4th-degree misdemeanor if damage exceeded $500. My garage door alone was going to be north of $1,200 to repair. I photographed the relevant pages, highlighted the lines in yellow marker, then photographed them again. Redundancy felt like armor. The sludge shots were the worst. By late afternoon on the 31st, the temperature had climbed just enough. The filthy pile was melting into black, oily rivulets that ran under the garage door and pooled inside on the concrete floor. Motor oil, road salt, antifreeze, bits of leaves and gravel. It looked like someone had dumped a tar pit in front of my house. I took close-ups, wide shots, time-stamped everything with my phone's GPS and the atomic clock app. One photo showed the puddle reflecting the Christmas lights still hanging from my eaves. Festive. Then came the gold mine. I'd been digging through the county's contractor licensing database, cross-referencing names and addresses. Snowbusters LLC was registered to a man named Darren K. Voss, 47, address in New Albany. His company had 3 prior complaints in the last 4 years. 2022. Fined $2,800 by the city of Worthington for dumping snow into a storm drain on High Street. 2023. Informal warning from Delaware County after a resident complained about snow piled against his fence, blocking access for 3 days. 2024. Actual citation, still pending appeal, from the village of Granville for unauthorized dumping on private church property during a February blizzard. The church had photos almost identical to mine. The real kicker. The 2024 Granville citation listed the responsible HOA as Maple Heights Homeowners Association. same contract number, same project manager signature. Linda McAllister. She signed off on hearing the cheapest bidder even after they'd been caught doing exactly this before. She renewed the contract in March 2025 anyway. I had the board minutes. Her name was there in black and white. Motion to award snow removal contract to Snowbusters LLC, approved 7-0. McAllister abstaining due to prior professional relationship with principal. Professional relationship. I laughed out loud in the empty garage. Of course. I spent another hour building a timeline on a large piece of foam board I'd bought from the craft store. Push pins, red string, printed screenshots, highlighted printouts. It looked paranoid. It looked perfect. When I stepped back to look at it, the whole ugly picture finally snapped into focus. Linda hadn't just ignored the problem. She'd engineered it. The retention pond had been overflowing since the second week of December. The board had discussed hearing extra plowing runs. Linda voted no, said it was fiscally irresponsible during the holiday budget cycle. She then personally approved overtime for Snowbusters to move snow off the common area without specifying where it could or could not go. The contractor, already on thin ice with the county, did what desperate contractors do: quick, dirty, cheap. And my driveway was the closest, easiest, most satisfying place to dump it. I took one last photo of the evidence wall, then folded the garage door shut against the gathering dark. Inside the house, the answering machine blinked. 3 messages. I didn't listen. I already knew who they'd be from. Tomorrow was January 1. New year. New rules. Linda thought she was untouchable, a small queen in a small kingdom built on petty fines and selective enforcement. She thought the paperwork, the favors, the old boy network would protect her forever. But she had just handed me the weapon I needed. Not a lawsuit. Not yet. Something cleaner. Something public. Something that would make every homeowner in Maple Heights look at their own driveway, then look at her, and finally understand exactly who had been running things behind all those polite smiles. I poured myself a glass of the cheap bourbon I kept for nights like this. Outside, the first fireworks of the evening cracked open the sky. I raised the glass toward the darkened window that faced her house 4 lots down. Happy New Year, Madam President. January 1, 2026. 9:47 a.m. The temperature hovered at -3 degrees C. The sky was the pale, ungenerous blue you only get after a night of fireworks and frozen breath. Most of Maple Heights was still hungover or pretending to be productive with their New Year resolutions. My driveway, however, remained a black glacier studded with gravel and shame. I was outside with a sledgehammer, trying to break the ice into manageable chunks so I could at least shovel a path wide enough for the Subaru to squeeze through. Every swing sent shockwaves up my arms and a fresh curse into the morning air. The pile was higher than my head in places, a ridiculous, obscene monument to petty vengeance. That was when Mark pulled up in his ancient Tacoma, the one with the mismatched fenders and the bumper sticker that read, "I brake for second-order effects." He killed the engine, stepped out wearing the same Carhartt jacket he'd worn since we were both 30 pounds lighter, and surveyed the disaster the way a general might look at a poorly chosen battlefield. "Jesus, Tom," he said, "they really went full medieval on you." Mark Kowalski, 42, structural engineer, the kind who could look at a bridge and tell you exactly which bolt was 2 turns away from catastrophic failure. We'd been neighbors for 7 years. He was the only one on the street who ever asked me to help move a couch without making it a referendum on my masculinity. He walked the perimeter of the snow mountain, boots crunching the frozen crust. Every few steps he stopped, crouched, poked the pile with a gloved finger, then nodded to himself like he was taking soil samples. "You know," he said at last, straightening up, "with the right compaction, this stuff could seal off an entire road." I lowered the sledgehammer. My arms were shaking. I hadn't realized how hard I'd been swinging. "What did you say?" He turned toward me. The grin that spread across his face was slow, almost embarrassed, like a kid who just discovered he could make fire with 2 sticks. "I'm just saying, hypothetically, if someone were to encourage this material to achieve maximum density, you could get a pretty impressive compressive strength. Snow's mostly air, right? But pack it right, layer it, wet it a little, let it refreeze overnight, and you're looking at something closer to low-strength concrete. You could block a 2-lane residential street for days, maybe a week, depending on thaw rate and traffic load." I stared at him. He kept going, voice dropping to the calm, clinical tone he used when explaining load paths to interns. "See that slope there?" He pointed at the far side of the pile, where the snow sloped gently toward the street. "If you were to, say, push more material from the top down, create a wedge shape, the angle of repose would hold until you got maybe 85% compaction. After that, it's self-supporting. You could even get away with a little cantilever if you timed the freeze-thaw cycles right." I felt something shift inside my chest, something between a laugh and a heart attack. "You're talking about turning my driveway into a deliberate roadblock." "I'm not talking about anything." He raised both hands, palms out. "I'm merely observing the material properties of frozen H2O mixed with various urban contaminants. Very educational." We stood there in silence for a long moment. Somewhere down the street, a snowblower coughed to life, then died again. The neighborhood was still asleep. Mark glanced toward Linda's house, 4 lots away, curtains still drawn, no sign of life. "You know she's got that big board meeting tomorrow night," he said casually. "The one where they vote on the 2026 budget. Everyone's gonna be there. Parking lot's already going to be tight." I looked at the snow mountain, then at the street, then back at the mountain. "How much time would we need?" I asked. My voice sounded strange to my own ears, too quiet, too steady. Mark shrugged. "If we started tonight, after dark, when the temperature drops again, we could get the bulk of it shaped by 2 a.m., wet it down with the garden hose, pack it with the tamper I've got in the garage, maybe throw some of that leftover road salt on top to slow melting. By morning, it'll be a solid mass. Give it 24 hours to refreeze and you've got something that'll take a front-end loader to move. And even then, they'd have to be careful not to tear up the asphalt." He paused. "Of course, this is all purely academic. I'm just a guy who likes physics. I would never suggest anyone actually do this. That would be irresponsible." I looked at him, really looked. He was still grinning, but his eyes were serious now, dead serious. "You didn't hear it from me," he said. And just like that, the idea was born. We didn't speak the plan out loud again that morning. We didn't need to. Mark went back to his house to check on his snowblower maintenance logs. I went inside, made 2 pots of coffee, one for drinking, one for later, and started sketching angles and volumes on the back of an old utility bill. By noon, I had a rough cross-section drawn. Base width, 4.8 meters full curb to curb. Height at center, 2.1 meters. Wedge angle, 38 degrees, just below the natural angle of repose for wet snow. Estimated volume, cubic meters, enough to fill the entire width of the street for 20 meters. Required compaction effort, 6-8 passes with a 150 lb plate tamper. Wetting, 400-600 liters of water, garden hose on mist setting to avoid washing out fines. I stared at the numbers until they blurred. This wasn't petty revenge anymore. This was engineering a crisis. I thought about the board meeting tomorrow, about the 30-odd homeowners who would try to drive home afterward, only to find their street impassable, about the phone calls, the complaints, the emergency HOA email chain that would light up like a Christmas tree, about Linda, standing at the head of the conference table in the community center, trying to explain how a routine snow removal operation had somehow resulted in a frozen barricade across the only exit from the neighborhood. I thought about the look on her face when she realized there was no quick fix, no 8 to 10 week complaint process, no favors she could call in, just physics and time and cold hard consequences. I folded the sketch, tucked it into the same pocket where I'd put her yellow complaint form 2 days earlier. Outside, the sun was already sliding toward the horizon. The temperature was falling fast. Mark's truck pulled back into his driveway at dusk. He didn't wave. He just popped the tailgate, slid out the plate tamper, and set it quietly on the grass between our properties. I walked over with the hose coiled in my arms. Neither of us said a word. We didn't have to. The mountain waited. January 2, 2026. 02:47 a.m. The neighborhood was dead quiet except for the low, constant whine of the wind through bare branches and the occasional distant bark of a dog that knew it was too cold to be outside. I had the garage door cracked just enough to slip underneath. The Subaru was already gone, parked 2 streets over at the empty lot behind the old elementary school, out of sight, out of suspicion. In its place sat the equipment I'd rented with a prepaid debit card from a 24-hour yard on the east side of town, a walk-behind plate compactor, Wacker Neuson VP 1340 AW, 4000 lb centrifugal force, and a small skid steer loader, Bobcat S450, bucket width 54 inches. The rental clerk hadn't asked questions. Cash and a fake name will do that at 11 p.m. on New Year's Day. I backed the skid steer out first, engine muffled under a thick canvas tarp I duct-taped over the exhaust. The compactor followed on its own trailer, wheels wrapped in old moving blankets to kill the rumble on the pavement. I drove slowly, lights off, speed under 10 miles an hour, until I reached the retention pond access gate. The padlock was still the cheap master lock Linda had bragged about saving $8 on during the last budget meeting. One solid hit with the bolt cutters, and it was gone. The snow mountain on my driveway waited like an obedient dog. I started at the top. Bucket down, scoop, lift, reverse. Each load was maybe a cubic yard and a half. I carried it straight across the common area grass, already torn up from the original dumping, so no new tracks worth noticing, past the retention pond, and onto the narrow private road that served as the only access to the Maple Heights clubhouse, the community gym, the mail kiosk cluster, and the single emergency exit gate at the far end. I dumped the first load dead center of the road, right where the pavement narrowed to squeeze between 2 decorative brick pillars. Then another. Then another. I built the pile outward in layers like laying brick, wide base first, then tapering upward into a wedge. Every third bucketful I paused to drag the compactor over the fresh deposit, back and forth, until the surface looked like wet concrete instead of snow. I sprayed each layer lightly with the hose connected to the spigot at the pump house, another gate I'd quietly opened. The water froze almost on contact. The temperature was minus 11 degrees C and dropping. By 4:20 a.m. the wall was chest-high across the full 30-foot width of the road. I kept going. At one point headlights swept across the far end, some early shift worker leaving the neighborhood. I killed the skid steer engine and dropped flat behind the growing berm. The car slowed, hesitated, then turned left instead of right, heading toward the back gate. I waited until the taillights disappeared, then started the machine again. I didn't stop until 06:12 a.m. when the sky began to bruise purple in the east. The finished barricade was ugly, brutal, and beautiful. Base, 9.5 meters wide, spilling slightly onto the grass verges. Center height, 2.4 meters. Top width, barely 1 meter, a deliberate knife edge. Compaction, at least 12 passes per layer. Estimated density, somewhere between 550–620 kg/m3 after freezing. Color, filthy gray-black from road grime, salt, and motor oil, impossible to mistake for natural accumulation. It looked exactly like what it was, A man-made disaster that had somehow appeared overnight in the exact spot where the HOA had decided to punish me. I walked the length of it once, boots sinking into the still soft outer edges. I pressed my palm against the center. It was already rock hard, the surface glazed with ice that caught the first pale light like dirty glass. I backed the equipment out the way I'd come, leaving the skid steer parked behind the pump house, compactor still on the trailer, both hidden from the main road by a stand of evergreens. I'd return them later after the chaos. For now, they were ghosts. I walked home the long way, cutting through backyards, staying off pavement. My coat was soaked through with sweat and spray. My fingers were numb inside the gloves. I didn't care. By 07:30 a.m., the first dog walkers appeared. The first scream of disbelief came from Mrs. Delgado at 07:42. "Oh my God, look at this." Then the murmurs, the phones coming out, the photos. By 08:15, the group text chain, the one Linda insisted we all join for community communication, exploded. Karen P. Is the road to the clubhouse blocked? Mike Delgado, someone dumped a literal mountain of snow overnight. It's solid. Janet R. I can't get my car out. The gym opens at 9. What the hell? Tom Whitaker, photo attached. Linda McAllister, everyone please remain calm. This appears to be an unauthorized accumulation. The board will address it at the emergency meeting this morning. Do not attempt to remove it yourselves. Safety first. Karen P. Safety first. My kid's school bus comes at 8:05 and now we're trapped. Linda McAllister, we are handling it. Please stand by. I watched the messages scroll from the warmth of my kitchen, coffee in hand, still wearing the same frozen clothes. At 08:47, a tow truck arrived, called by someone impatient. The driver took one look at the wall, shook his head, and drove away without even unloading the chains. At 09:12, the first police cruiser rolled up. Lights off, no siren. Just two officers stepping out, staring, then laughing, quiet, disbelieving laughs that carried on the cold air. I sipped my coffee. The clubhouse road was sealed shut. The gym was inaccessible. The mail center, where half the neighborhood picked up packages, was behind the wall. The emergency gate at the back, buried under 2 feet of overflow from my original pile, which I'd quietly dragged there during the 4th hour. No one was going anywhere until the thaw. Or until someone with heavy equipment admitted this was their mess in the first place. I set the mug down and opened my laptop. Time to draft the next email to the full membership list, one that would be very polite, very factual, and include every photo, every bylaw citation, every contractor record I'd collected. Subject line: urgent, unauthorized snow dumping on private property, documentation and request for immediate remediation. I hit send at 09:38 a.m. Then I went upstairs, took a long hot shower and crawled into bed. Outside, the neighborhood was waking up to the sound of their own outrage. And somewhere in the middle of it all, Linda McAllister was staring at the same wall I'd built. I hope she enjoyed the view. January 2, 2026. 11:17 a.m. The neighborhood had become a zoo without cages. Cars were backed up at the main entrance like a funeral procession that forgot where the cemetery was. Horns honked in short, frustrated bursts. Someone had already tried to ram the barricade with a pickup truck, left a crumpled hood and a long smear of red paint across the ice. The wall hadn't even cracked. I was in the kitchen, watching the circus through the window blinds when the pounding started. Not knocking, pounding, the kind that rattles pictures on the wall and makes the doorbell chime in sympathy. I set my coffee down, walked to the front door, and opened it just as Linda raised her fist for another blow. She was still in yesterday's makeup, hair slightly askew, coat unbuttoned over yesterday's sweater. Behind her, 3 other board members hovered like nervous birds. Karen with her phone already recording, Mike Delgado looking equal parts furious and terrified, and Janet holding a clipboard like it was a shield. Linda's eyes were wild. She didn't wait for an invitation. "You can't block the street," she screamed, voice cracking on the last word. I stepped outside onto the porch, closing the storm door gently behind me. The cold hit like a slap. I cradled the mug in both hands, letting the steam curl up between us. I took a slow sip. Why not? It's just snow. It'll melt eventually. Her mouth opened, closed, opened again. The color climbed her neck in blotchy red waves. "This is obstruction of community property. This is vandalism. This is criminal trespass. You're blocking access to the clubhouse, the gym, the mailboxes. People can't even get their packages." The mail carrier turned around and left. I tilted my head, the picture of calm. Sounds inconvenient. Karen's phone was still up, red record light blinking. "Say that again," she hissed. "Say it on camera." I looked straight into the lens. "It's just snow, Karen. It'll melt eventually. Stop overreacting." Linda lunged forward half a step. Mike caught her elbow. "Linda." "Don't Linda me," she jerked free. "He did this, overnight, with equipment. I know he did. We have witnesses. Mrs. Delgado saw lights behind the pump house at 3 in the morning." I raised an eyebrow. "Lights, in January at 3 a.m. Sounds like a UFO sighting. You should file that with the board, too." "This isn't funny, Thomas." Her voice was climbing into the register that usually got her what she wanted at meetings. I took another sip. "I'm not laughing. I'm drinking coffee. You're the one screaming on my porch like it's an episode of Real Housewives of Maple Heights." Mike cleared his throat. "We're prepared to call the police again. They were here earlier. They said if it's deliberate." "Deliberate?" I echoed. "You mean like deliberately dumping 3 cubic yards of contaminated snow onto my private driveway at 2 in the morning? Like that kind of deliberate?" Silence landed like a dropped brick. Janet finally spoke, voice thin. "That was an unfortunate mistake by the contractor. We're looking into it." "Great," I nodded toward the street. "You should look into this unfortunate mistake too. I'm sure the same contractor would be happy to come back with a loader and clean it up." "Oh wait, the road to the clubhouse is blocked. How are they supposed to get here?" Linda's hands were shaking. She looked like she wanted to strangle me with her scarf. "So file a complaint," I said, voice mild. "It'll be reviewed in 8 to 10 weeks. That's standard processing time for non-emergency violations, right? You told me that yourself, word for word." Her face went from red to something closer to purple. I could see the vein pulsing at her temple. "This is different," she spat. "This is the entire community being held hostage." "Hostage?" I repeated. Interesting choice of word, because yesterday I was the one who couldn't get my car out. Yesterday I was the one watching antifreeze sludge melt into my garage. Yesterday I was the one being told to wait 8 to 10 weeks while my property value dropped and my insurance adjuster laughed on the phone. I stepped closer, just one step, enough that she had to tilt her head up to meet my eyes. "Funny how fast the rules change when it's your convenience on the line, isn't it, Madam President?" Karen's phone wavered. The red light still on, but her hand was shaking now. Linda took a ragged breath. "You think you've won something here? You think this little stunt makes you clever? The board will vote to fine you. We'll lien your house. You'll what?" I cut in. "Call an emergency meeting." "Oh wait, you can't. The clubhouse is on the other side of my little winter art installation." Mike muttered something about public safety and fire department access. I ignored him. "Tell you what," I said. "I'll make you a deal. You admit in writing to the full membership list that the association hired a contractor with 3 prior dumping violations, that you personally signed off on the renewal despite knowing the history, and that the snow on my driveway was unauthorized and caused documented damage. You agree to cover the full cost of repair and cleanup, no insurance runaround, and you issue a public apology. Do that, and I'll personally call the guy with the skid steer who did this. I'm sure he'll come right over." Linda laughed. It sounded like breaking glass. "You're delusional." "Am I?" I shrugged. "Your choice. In the meantime, enjoy the view. It's supposed to stay below freezing until Tuesday." I turned back toward the door. "Thomas," she shouted after me. I paused, hand on the knob. "This isn't over," she said. Her voice was lower now, almost a hiss. "You don't get to humiliate me. You don't get to humiliate the board." I looked over my shoulder. "I'm not humiliating anyone. I'm just letting physics do its job. Snow melts. Rules get enforced. Complaints get processed. Eventually." I stepped inside and closed the door. Through the glass I watched her stand there, fists clenched, breathing hard. The 3 board members tried to herd her back toward the street, but she shook them off like flies. For a moment she stared at my house the way someone stares at a locked safe they know contains their secrets. Then she turned on her heel and marched toward the crowd that had gathered at the edge of the barricade. Phones were still out. Voices were rising. I went back to the kitchen, refilled my coffee, and opened my laptop. The group email chain had 147 unread messages. I started typing. Subject: follow-up. Unauthorized snow dumping, offer of resolution. Body: Dear neighbors, as you're all aware, the access road to the Clubhouse Gym Mail Center is currently impassable due to an accumulation of snow and ice. While I share your frustration, I must point out that this situation is the direct result of an earlier unauthorized deposit of approximately 3 cubic yards of snow onto my private driveway on the night of December 28-29. Attached you will find timestamp video from a neighbor's security camera showing a Snowbusters LLC skid steer depositing the material. Excerpts from the HOA Declaration of Covenants, Section 7.4, prohibiting such deposits on private property. County records of 3 prior citations against Snowbusters LLC for similar violations. Board minutes showing President McAllister's approval of the 2025-2026 snow removal contract renewal, despite the known history. I have offered the board a simple resolution, a written admission of responsibility, full reimbursement for damages, and a public apology to the membership. If accepted, I will facilitate immediate removal of the obstruction. Until then, physics remains in charge. Happy New Year. Thomas Whitaker. Lot 42. I attached the files, hit send. Then I leaned back in the chair, listening to the distant sound of Linda trying to regain control of the growing mob. The look on her face when she read the email would be worth every frozen minute I'd spent working overnight. I took another sip of coffee. It was still hot. January 2, 2026, 13:42. The sky had gone from pale blue to bruised gray. Fat flakes drifted down again, lazy and mocking. The barricade was now dusted with fresh powder, looking almost innocent if you didn't know the story. Linda had escalated. Of course she had. By early afternoon, 3 squad cars, a fire engine, and the county fire marshal's unmarked Tahoe were parked crookedly along the curb. Yellow caution tape fluttered between sawhorses. A small crowd, maybe 30 homeowners, huddled in parkas and beanies, phones recording, breath fogging the air like a collective sigh of anticipation. The fire marshal was a broad-shouldered man in his late 50s named Robert Harlan. Navy blue coat, gold badge, clipboard under one arm, face carved from years of telling people things they didn't want to hear. He walked the length of the ice wall once, then again, boots squeaking on the frozen crust. He stopped at the narrowest point, crouched, scraped a gloved finger across the glazed surface, tasted nothing, nodded once. Linda, flanked by Mike Delgado and Corinne, still filming, launched into her prepared speech the second he stood up. "Marshal Harlan, thank you for coming so quickly. This is a clear public safety hazard. The road is completely blocked. Fire trucks cannot access the clubhouse or the back gate. Emergency vehicles would be unable to reach at least 42 homes. The individual responsible," she jabbed a finger toward my porch, "created this obstruction deliberately overnight. We have witnesses. We demand immediate removal and citation for endangerment." Harlan didn't even glance at her. He kept looking at the wall, then at the tire tracks still visible in the grass margin leading back toward the retention pond. "Ma'am," he said, voice low and flat, "let's start with the basics. Whose snow is this?" Linda blinked. I'm sorry." "The material, the snow and ice, where did it come from originally?" I stepped forward from the porch then, hands in pockets, no coat, letting the cold bite. Everyone turned. Phones swung toward me like weapons. Harlan finally looked my way. "Mr. Whitaker." I nodded. He pointed at the wall. "You built this." "I relocated material that was illegally placed on my private driveway," I said. "Material that originated from the association's contractor and was deposited without permission on the night of December 28th to 29th. Linda's mouth opened, but Harlan raised a hand. She closed it. He turned back to her. "You have property maps, plat survey, anything showing common area versus private lots?" Karen thrust a folded packet forward. Harlan took it, flipped through pages, compared them to the aerial photo on his tablet. He walked the boundary line himself, boots crunching over the pink spray paint marks I'd laid down days earlier. He stopped exactly where the common area grass ended and my concrete began. "Clear," he muttered, then louder. "The deposit point is entirely on private property. No dispute." Linda tried again. "But the barricade itself is on Association Road." "Which is also association property," Harlan finished. "But the material came from where?" Silence. He tapped the tablet. "I've already reviewed the security footage Mrs. Delgado provided. Skid steer, Snowbusters LLC markings moving snow from the retention pond, common area, across the boundary onto Mr. Whitaker's driveway. Multiple trips, door scrape visible, timestamp matches the complaint." Linda's face drained of color. She looked like someone had just pulled the plug on her. Harlan continued, calm, methodical. "Under Ohio Revised Code 3737.41, the fire marshal has authority to declare and order abatement of fire hazards. Blocked access roads can qualify, yes, but causation matters. The hazard exists because material was moved from point A to point B. Point A is HOA common area. The transfer was unauthorized. The material remains HOA-originated waste." He looked straight at Linda. "Since the snow originated from the HOA's trucks and was dumped illegally, the HOA is responsible for its removal." Linda stuttered, "But." He cut her off without raising his voice. "Also, you may be fined for unauthorized disposal. The County Environmental Division has already been copied on the footage. Dumping contaminated snow, road salt, motor oil, antifreeze residue onto private property without permit violates ORC 6111.04 and local solid waste ordinances. That's a separate track, but it's active now." The board members looked like they wanted to melt into the snow themselves. Mike's jaw worked silently. Karen lowered her phone. Janet's clipboard dangled forgotten at her side. Harlan turned to me. "Mr. Whitaker, you understand this obstruction still constitutes a potential life safety issue. I can't force immediate removal without a court order, but I can post the road as impassable and recommend the association remediate within 24 hours to avoid escalation to the prosecutor's office." I nodded. "Understood. I'm willing to assist with removal the moment the association accepts liability in writing for the original damage to my property." Harlan gave the smallest of smiles, gone in half a second. "Reasonable." He faced Linda again. Madam President, I suggest you call an emergency board meeting, preferably somewhere other than the clubhouse. You have 24 hours before I file a formal hazard report and notify the county engineer." He handed her a carbon copy notice, yellow paper flapping in the wind. Then he walked back to his Tahoe, engine already running, leaving the yellow tape in stunned silence behind him. Linda stood frozen, the notice trembling in her hand. The crowd was no longer whispering. They were staring at her, phones still up but now pointed at the board, not at me. I stepped back onto my porch. Just before I closed the door, I heard Karen whisper, "Linda, we need to talk." I didn't smile. I didn't need to. The physics was still winning. January 5, 2026. The temperature had stayed stubbornly below freezing for 3 straight days. The ice wall had only grown meaner, thicker, harder, glazed with a fresh layer of sleet that fell on the 3rd. Every morning the neighborhood woke to the same comedy. HOA contracted dump trucks rumbling up to the barrier, drivers climbing out, scratching helmets, then backing away defeated. One crew tried a front-end loader with chains on the tires. The bucket scraped, sparks flew, the machine lurched, and then the whole thing slid sideways into the snowbank like a drunk on ice skates. They left the bucket marks as souvenirs. The community email chain had gone from outrage to dark humor to exhausted resignation. Someone posted a time-lapse of the failed attempts. Someone else started a poll. How many more days until Linda admits fault? The options were 1, 3, 4, 7, 8, 14, and never pray for spring. Never was winning by a landslide. I spent those 3 days quietly. I worked from home, answered emails, watched the trucks fail, and waited. On the morning of the 5th, I walked to the post office, handed the clerk a thick manila envelope, and paid extra for certified mail with return receipt requested. The letter inside was typed on plain white paper, no letterhead, no frills, just facts, law, and deadlines. Certified mail, return receipt REQSTD. January 5, 2026. Linda McAllister, President. Maple Heights Homeowners Association. 123 Maple Crest Lane. City, OH43XXX. Ray, demand for immediate remediation of unauthorized snow ice deposit on private property. Lot 42. Notice of intent to pursue legal remedies. Dear Ms. McAllister, this letter constitutes formal notice and demand pursuant to Ohio law. On or about December 29, 2025, a contractor retained by the Maple Heights Homeowners Association, hereinafter Association, specifically Snowbusters LLC under contract SB 202511, deposited approximately 33 cubic yards of snow, ice, road salt, motor oil residue, antifreeze, and other contaminants directly onto my private driveway and garage entry at Lot 42. Without my consent and in direct violation of Section 7.4 of the Association's Declaration of Covenants, Conditions, and Restrictions. Said deposit has caused and continues to cause the following documented damages: structural abrasion and denting to garage door, estimated repair $200 $1,800. Contamination of garage floor with hazardous substances, estimated professional cleanup $800 $200. Inability to access driveway and vehicle, ongoing economic loss and inconvenience. Diminution of property value pending resolution. Video evidence, county contractor records, board minutes bearing your signature approving the contract renewal despite prior violations, and survey documentation conclusively establish association responsibility. To date, the association has failed to remediate the original deposit or accept liability. In response, I relocated a portion of said material to the association's private access road serving the clubhouse, gym, and mail center, material that remains the association's property and responsibility. Demand. Within 10 calendar days of receipt of this letter, i.e., by January 15, 2026, the association shall remove at its sole expense all snow ice originally deposited on Lot 42 and any relocated material on the access road. Restore my property to pre-incident condition, including professional cleaning of contaminated surfaces and repair of garage door. Compensate me in the amount of $4,500 for documented damages, loss of use, and related costs, itemized breakdown attached. Provide written acknowledgement of responsibility signed by you as president and ratified by the board. Failure to comply will result in the following: filing of a civil complaint in the Court of Common Pleas for breach of covenants, negligence, trespass, and private nuisance. Request for temporary restraining order and preliminary injunction, compelling immediate remediation. Demand for attorney fees, court costs, and punitive damages pursuant to Ohio Revised Code Section 5311.27 and applicable case law. Notification to the Ohio Attorney General's Office of potential consumer protection violations. Referral of environmental contamination to the Ohio EPA. This is not negotiation, this is notice. I remain available to facilitate prompt resolution if the association acts in good faith. Sincerely, Thomas Whitaker, Lot 42, Maple Heights. Enclosures. Photo timeline. Security footage stills. Survey plat with boundary markings. Relevant bylaw excerpts. Contractor violation history. Itemized damage estimate. I had the return receipt back by the next afternoon. Linda had signed for it at 10:22 a.m. on January 6. That same day she called me 3 times from her personal cell, no number blocked. I let it go to voicemail. The messages were a masterpiece of escalation. First, Thomas, this is ridiculous. Call me so we can discuss this like adults. Second, you're making a huge mistake. The board is prepared to pursue legal action against you for the obstruction. You'll be fined thousands. Third, pick up the phone, Thomas. You don't know who you're dealing with. I saved each one, timestamped, transcribed, and added them to the growing file. She tried the next level that evening, an emergency board meeting held virtually since the clubhouse was still unreachable. The recording was leaked to the membership list within an hour. Someone on the board had finally cracked. Linda's voice filled my living room speakers. We have to stand united. This is extortion. We'll countersue. We'll lien his house. We'll. A new voice cut in, Janet, the quiet one with the clipboard. Linda, the fire marshal, already said we're responsible. The footage is everywhere. If we go to court, we'll lose. And the legal fees. Silence on the line. Then Linda, quieter, we can't just admit fault, it sets precedent. Mike, precedent for what? Not dumping snow on people's driveways. More silence. The meeting ended without resolution. The next morning I found a note taped to my door, handwritten on HOA letterhead. Thomas, we're willing to discuss reasonable terms. Call me. Yell. I took a photo, added it to the file, and kept waiting. Because I had something she didn't. Proof. Every timestamp, every signature, every recorded word, every failed truck attempt, every admission she'd already made in panic. She could threaten, she could bluff, she could scream. None of it mattered. The clock was ticking. 10 days. And the ice wasn't going anywhere until she did the right thing, or until a judge told her to. The HOA board turned on Linda. Residents complained they couldn't access the mailboxes. A club event had to be canceled. Delivery trucks refused to enter. And when the contractor admitted the HOA ordered them to dump snow on my property. Linda's rule ended that very night. She was forced to resign. The HOA finally hired a professional removal crew. They spent 2 full days melting, breaking, and hauling away the roadblock I created. Afterward, the HOA rep knocked on my door with an envelope. Inside, bullet a written apology, a reimbursement check, bullet and confirmation that my property would never be used for dumping again. I smiled. Winter wasn't over. But for the first time in years, the HOA's icy grip on the neighborhood had melted away completely.